My wife cheated in our shower, I snapped and hit the guy. Now my son testifies I'm the monster. Then karma delivered the perfect ending. All right, Reddit, buckle up because this is going to be a long one. Grab whatever you need to settle in because this story spans 2 full years, involves a destroyed marriage, a son who completely turned his back on me, and karma serving up the most beautifully poetic justice I've ever witnessed in real life. Let me start from the very beginning and walk you through every single brutal detail. I'm 45 years old, been married to Rachel for 18 years total. We got married young after she got pregnant with our son Tyler, who's 19 now, and in his second year at State College studying business administration. I inherited my house from my grandmother 5 years before I even got married. So this place has been in my family for literal decades, going all the way back to the 1960s when she first bought it. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, nice-sized backyard with a shed that I converted into a workshop where I restore old furniture in my spare time whenever I get a chance. Nothing fancy or luxurious by any means, but it's mine, and it's been paid off for years. Every property tax bill I pay, it's all on a house that's been in my family since before I was even born. My grandmother raised 3 kids here. My mom grew up in this house. Now it was supposed to be mine and Rachel's forever home. I work in project coordination for a mid-sized manufacturing company that makes industrial equipment primarily for construction and agriculture sectors across the Midwest. Started on the assembly line right out of high school at 18 years old. Worked my way up slowly but steadily over 20 years to a senior position where I'm overseeing logistics operations, managing supplier relationships, and coordinating major client projects from initial planning all the way through to final delivery. Good comprehensive benefits package, decent salary hovering around 80 grand a year before taxes, stable work that I'm actually good at, and genuinely take pride in doing well. Rachel worked part-time as an office administrator for a local dentist, but quit 3 years ago because she said the constant drama with her coworkers was giving her stress migraines, and the 40-minute commute each way was getting to her mentally. I didn't push back on that decision at all because we could afford to live quite comfortably on just my income alone, and honestly, she seemed genuinely relieved and happier to be done with that job and all its office politics. Our marriage wasn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but whose marriage really is after 18 years together. We had our routines down, our rhythm and flow, our life together that felt stable. I'd leave for work every morning at 7 on the dot. She'd have coffee ready and waiting and maybe some toast or cereal. I'd come home around 6 in the evening. She'd usually have dinner already started, or we'd just order takeout from the Chinese place down the street that we both liked. Weekends were yard work and house maintenance, grocery shopping and running errands, maybe catching a movie at the theater or binge watching something together on streaming services. Tyler would come home from college every few weeks or so, do mountains of laundry, raid our fridge and pantry like college kids do, tell us all about his classes and professors, and his girlfriend Olivia, who he seemed really genuinely serious about for the long term. It was normal, comfortable, predictable in what I thought was a good way. Looking back now with much clearer eyes and hindsight, there were definite warning signs that I completely missed, or maybe just chose to ignore because I didn't want to see what was right in front of my face. Rachel started going to the gym way more often about a year ago, sometimes even twice a day, which seemed excessive to me. New expensive workout clothes kept mysteriously showing up in her closet, then regular clothes and outfits I'd never seen her wear before. She started spending significantly more time on her phone constantly, always carefully angling the screen away from me whenever I walked by, or quickly closing apps and locking her phone when I got anywhere near her. She began taking more and more trips to visit her sister Hannah, who lives 2 hours away in the suburbs outside the city. Weekend trips that somehow kept turning into long 3-day and 4-day weekends away from home. I figured she was just enjoying having more free time now that she wasn't working and could visit family more often. Looking back now, I was such an absolute fool to miss all those obvious red flags. Last Wednesday afternoon changed absolutely everything in my entire world. I wrapped up a business trip to Indianapolis 2 whole days earlier than originally planned. My meetings with potential new suppliers finished way ahead of schedule on Wednesday afternoon instead of dragging on into Friday, like they were originally scheduled to do. So instead of staying in the hotel and burning unnecessary company money for absolutely no reason, I made the executive decision to surprise Rachel and just head home early. Stopped at the florist near our highway exit and picked up a dozen beautiful white roses because those have always been her absolute favorites since we first started dating nearly 20 years ago. Got home around 2 in the afternoon, feeling pretty good about myself for surprising my wife with flowers. There was a car sitting in our driveway that I absolutely didn't recognize at all. Silver Honda Accord sedan. Newer model, maybe 2020 or 2021, based on the body style. Figured maybe one of Rachel's friends had stopped by to hang out and chat, or maybe a neighbor needed to borrow something from us. Used my house key to walk in through the front door like I always do, and called out cheerfully and loudly that I was home early, fully expecting to see Rachel's face light up with genuine surprise. No answer came back at all. Complete and total silence throughout the entire downstairs. Put the dozen white roses carefully in a glass vase in the kitchen, then heard the shower running upstairs in our master bathroom. That's when I heard voices floating down clearly from the second floor. Two distinct voices. One was definitely Rachel without any question, laughing in a way I honestly and truly hadn't heard come out of her mouth in literal years. Light and carefree, almost giddy and girlish, like when we first started dating back in our early 20s. The other voice was definitely, unmistakably male, and definitely not someone I recognized or had ever heard before in my entire life. I stood completely frozen at the bottom of the stairs for probably 30 or 40 seconds straight, my brain desperately scrambling to come up with some reasonable explanation that wasn't what I already knew. Deep down in my gut, it absolutely had to be. Maybe it's a plumber she called and Rachel's just being friendly. Maybe her brother drove up unexpectedly. Maybe I'm completely losing my mind and hearing things that aren't actually there. But I knew the truth. Deep in my gut, where you just know things without needing proof, I already knew exactly what was happening upstairs in my own house. Walked upstairs slowly and deliberately, each individual step feeling heavier and heavier than the last one. The master bathroom door was cracked open about 6 inches, and through the frosted glass shower door, I could clearly see two distinct silhouettes moving together in ways that left absolutely no room for interpretation. My wife of 18 years and some guy I'd never met before. Both very clearly, obviously, unmistakably naked together, and doing things that married people are supposed to only do with each other. Everything that happened in the next few moments is honestly kind of a blur. Even now, when I try really hard to remember it clearly, I threw open that shower door with enough physical force that it banged loudly against the tile wall, and there they were both frozen like deer caught in headlights. Rachel screamed this piercing, high-pitched scream and immediately grabbed desperately for a towel hanging on the nearby rack. The guy, who I later found out through the police report was named Brandon, immediately put both his hands straight up in the air like he was dealing with a police officer during a traffic stop. Mid-30s from what I could tell at a glance, dark hair slicked back with shower water, well-built physique like he spent serious dedicated time at the gym. Standing there completely naked in my shower with my wife in the house, my dead grandmother left me in her will. Brandon had the absolute unbelievable nerve to immediately start talking in this super calm, totally reasonable voice, like we were having some kind of rational adult discussion about something minor and fixable. Said he'd just get dressed real quick and leave the property without any problem at all. No need for things to get ugly here. Maybe it was seeing him so composed and collected, like getting caught sleeping with another man's wife was just a minor inconvenience in his day. Maybe it was the undeniable fact that this was happening in my house that I inherited, in my shower, in the bathroom where I brush my teeth every single day. Maybe it was 18 full years of marriage and trust and partnership just completely shattering right in front of my eyes. Something deep inside me just completely snapped like a dry twig under too much pressure. I grabbed him extremely hard by both shoulders with all my strength and physically threw him against the hard tile bathroom wall with every single ounce of force I had in my body. He hit that solid tile wall hard enough that I heard the impact echo throughout the bathroom. He tried to push me back away from him, so I punched him square in the face as hard as I possibly could. Then I punched him again in the jaw with my other fist. Rachel was screaming bloody murder at me to stop, to please just stop, but I couldn't hear her voice clearly over the roaring sound of pure rage in my own ears. The guy ended up crumpled on the wet bathroom floor in a heap with both hands over his face, desperately trying to protect himself and blood actively pouring from his nose all over my white tile floor. I probably would have kept hitting him over and over until he literally stopped moving entirely. But seeing that bright red blood running freely between his fingers and pooling on the white floor brought me crashing back to reality, like ice-cold water thrown in my face. I backed away from him physically, breathing extremely hard, and told him in no uncertain terms that he had exactly 5 minutes to get completely out of my house before I called the police. He grabbed his clothes that were scattered all across the bathroom floor and literally ran out of my house at top speed, still half-dressed and still actively bleeding from his broken nose. Rachel wrapped herself quickly in a towel and went running after him, not even looking back at me once. When Rachel finally came back inside about 20 minutes later, She stood rigidly in the doorway of our living room and told me in this ice-cold, completely flat voice that I was a violent psychopath and that she was immediately packing a bag and staying at her sister Hannah's house for the foreseeable future. Said I could have literally killed Brandon with my bare hands and that she was now genuinely afraid of me. The same woman who'd been laughing in the shower with another man was now playing the innocent victim. The very next day, Tyler called me from his dorm room at college. Said his mother had called him crying and told him what happened. Her carefully edited version of events anyway. He couldn't believe, absolutely could not believe that I would physically attack an innocent person like some kind of animal. When I tried to explain to him that the guy was actively sleeping with his mother in our house, in our shower, he cut me off sharply and said that still didn't give me any right whatsoever to assault anyone. Told me flat out that he was ashamed to call me his father right now. My younger brother Kevin thinks I absolutely should have just immediately called the police instead of taking matters into my own hands. But what exactly were they going to charge Brandon with? It's not against the law in any state to sleep with someone's wife if she's willing and consenting. The whole situation felt completely surreal, like I was living in some alternate reality. I caught my wife of 18 years cheating on me in my own shower with some random guy I'd never even met. And somehow in absolutely everyone's eyes, I'm automatically the bad guy here, the violent criminal. First update, everything just got nuclear. Well, Reddit, things went from bad to completely and totally screwed in ways I never could have possibly imagined. I'm writing this entire update from a budget hotel room on the outskirts of town, because I literally cannot legally get into my own house that's been in my family for over half a century. Brandon made the decision to press full criminal charges against me for assault. Friday morning around 10, two uniformed police officers showed up at my office building while I was sitting in the middle of an extremely important meeting with three major clients about a significant industrial project we were coordinating. They were professional and polite about the whole arrest process, but there's absolutely nothing discreet about getting arrested at your workplace in front of important clients and all your coworkers. My boss, Jim, had to very awkwardly explain to the confused clients why their important meeting was being abruptly postponed while I was being led out of the building in handcuffs in front of everyone. I spent the entire Friday night locked in the county jail before my lawyer could finally arrange bail Saturday morning. I'm being officially charged with third-degree assault, which my lawyer explained is apparently just a misdemeanor rather than a serious felony charge, but can still potentially carry up to a full year in jail and a $4,000 fine if I'm actually found guilty at trial. Bail was set at $2,500 total, which I had to pay completely in cash to get released. While I was sitting alone in that cold jail cell overnight, Rachel went directly to family court and successfully obtained a temporary emergency restraining order against me. Her official petition to the court claimed in writing that I had a well-documented history of controlling and violent behavior throughout our entire 18-year marriage, and that she legitimately feared I might physically harm her. This is a complete and total lie from start to finish. I have never once in my entire life laid a hand on Rachel in anger during our 18 years of marriage together. Never pushed her, never grabbed her roughly, never even raised my voice at her in a genuinely threatening way before this nightmare started. The restraining order legally means I cannot come within 100 yards of her under any circumstances whatsoever, which very conveniently includes my own house since she's currently living there alone. When I got released Saturday morning and drove straight home hoping to at least grab some clean clothes, I discovered to my shock that Rachel had already changed every single lock on every door. My house key that I've been using for over 2 decades no longer works in any lock anywhere. There's even a police patrol car parked directly across the street, apparently specifically assigned to monitor the house and make sure I don't violate the protective order. I called my lawyer Tom immediately from the driveway. He told me very clearly that since the house is legally mine alone, and I have the original deed from my grandmother to prove sole ownership, we can definitely fight this in court. But these things unfortunately take significant time to work through the legal system. The temporary emergency order is valid for exactly 2 weeks, and then there's a formal court hearing, where a judge will carefully review all the evidence and decide whether to make the restraining order permanent or dismiss it entirely. In the meantime, I'm legally barred from setting foot on my own property that's been in my family since my grandmother originally bought it back in 1967. I'm currently staying in a cheap budget hotel, living entirely out of the single small suitcase I took on my business trip to Indianapolis. I literally cannot access my own clothes hanging in my bedroom closet, my important mail that's probably piling up, my personal belongings and crucial documents. Absolutely nothing. Rachel doesn't answer any of my phone calls or text messages, no matter what time I try. When I called the house landline hoping she'd pick up, She actually answered, but immediately hung up the second she heard my voice. But the absolute worst part of this entire nightmare is what's happening with Tyler. He came back home from college this past weekend, specifically to stay at the house with his mother and support her. I sent him a text message asking if we could maybe meet somewhere neutral like a coffee shop and talk this through. His response came back within minutes, and it was absolutely brutal to read. Said his mom showed him the complete police report, and he can't believe someone like me is actually his father. Told me directly not to contact him again until I get professional help for my serious anger issues. What anger issues exactly? I've never had any kind of documented anger issues in my entire 45 years of life. Never been in a physical fight with anyone since middle school. Never punched a wall in rage. Never thrown objects across rooms. Never screamed at people. The only single time I've ever been violent with another human being was when I found some complete stranger in my shower, actively sleeping with my wife. But somehow, in everyone's narrative, I'm automatically the crazy one, the dangerous one who needs help. My lawyer Tom says the restraining order will almost certainly be only temporary and won't be made permanent by the judge since there's absolutely zero concrete evidence of any domestic violence or direct threats. Rachel would have to somehow prove a very clear pattern of ongoing abuse and violence, and she can't do that because that pattern simply doesn't exist. But he also warned me that these legal things can drag on for many months through the court system, especially if Rachel decides to file for divorce at the same time. Had to call my boss Jim and explain in detail exactly why I was arrested on company property in front of important clients. He was surprisingly understanding and said he knows I'm a good employee with a solid track record, but he made it very clear that if this criminal case ends in an actual conviction or affects my ability to work professionally with clients, we would need to have a serious conversation about my future employment at the company. I've been working there for 12 solid years without a single disciplinary issue, and now my entire job and career are seriously at risk. The financial hit is absolutely brutal. Between paying my lawyer's retainer fee, posting bail, and now hotel expenses, I've already burned through over $8,000 in less than 1 week. I still have to keep paying the full mortgage payment every month on a house I'm not even legally allowed to enter, plus all my regular credit card payments and Tyler's college tuition bills. Rachel has complete access to our joint bank accounts, so she could theoretically drain every penny while I'm stuck paying for everything separately. I genuinely feel like I'm being severely punished for being the actual victim here. She openly cheats on me in my own house with some random guy, and somehow I end up arrested and essentially homeless while she gets to play the poor innocent victim. How is any of that justice? Second update, the courtroom betrayal that broke me. The official hearing on Rachel's restraining order petition took place 3 weeks ago, and it absolutely forever changed my relationship with my son in ways I never thought would be possible. Let me start with the good news first. The judge dismissed the entire restraining order completely. My lawyer Tom was absolutely right about everything. Rachel couldn't prove even a single shred of concrete evidence showing any history of domestic violence or threats. The judge stated very clearly in her official ruling that while what I did to Brandon was obviously wrong, and I'd face consequences for that separately, it was clearly an isolated incident that didn't demonstrate any kind of ongoing pattern of violence specifically toward Rachel herself. The protective order was lifted entirely, and I got full access back to my house immediately. But here's where this whole thing gets really messed up. Tyler actually showed up to that court hearing specifically and deliberately to testify on behalf of his mother against me. My own son, the kid I raised from birth, stood before that judge and blatantly lied about me under oath. He claimed with a completely straight face that I was controlling and emotionally abusive throughout his entire childhood growing up. Said that I constantly monitored and controlled all communications in our home, and that I made every single important family decision without ever consulting his mother. Told the judge directly I had a seriously bad temper, and that he was constantly afraid of making me angry while growing up. Complete and total lies, all of it. Yeah, when Tyler was a teenager going through high school, Rachel and I had reasonable rules about his cell phone usage and internet access exactly like every responsible parent does. But that's called being good parents who care about their kids' safety. And yes, I made most final decisions about major things like our family finances and home repairs. But that was specifically because Rachel had always told me directly she didn't want to deal with that stuff and preferred I handle those responsibilities entirely so she didn't have to think about them. The most painful part that still haunts me was when Tyler said he felt genuinely relieved when he finally left for college because he no longer had to constantly walk on eggshells at home trying not to upset me. This is the exact same kid who used to call me every single Sunday afternoon without fail from his dorm room, just to talk about his classes, his professors, his new friends, asking for my advice about everything. Now he's standing in an official courtroom telling a judge that he was secretly afraid of his own father for 18 years. My lawyer Tom cross-examined Tyler extremely hard and didn't hold back. Asked him very specific, pointed questions about specific incidents of violence or abuse he supposedly witnessed. Tyler couldn't name even a single specific incident, which greatly weakened the credibility of his testimony. When Tom asked him directly if I had ever physically hit him, or his mother even once, Tyler had to admit under oath that no, I had never done that, but then quickly added that abuse isn't always physical. The judge clearly didn't buy Tyler's testimony based on her facial expressions and questions. She stated very clearly that while family testimony is important to consider, she needed to see actual concrete evidence of genuinely threatening behavior, specifically toward Rachel, not just vague general claims about family dynamics. That's when my lawyer presented our counter evidence. We had obtained Rachel's complete credit card statements and detailed bank records from the last 8 months. She had spent over $7,000 just on hotels and expensive restaurants during her affair with Brandon. These weren't cheap motels. There were charges showing weekend trips to Chicago, Milwaukee, and even a long weekend in Minneapolis. The hotel charges alone totaled $7,800. Luxury places like the Grand Geneva Resort and the Palmer House Hilton, running anywhere from $300 to $400 per night. Another $4,200 spent on dinners at expensive steakhouses and upscale restaurants, always charged for exactly 2 people, plus $3,000 additional dollars at various jewelry stores and men's clothing boutiques, buying expensive gifts that certainly weren't for me since I never received a single one. My lawyer also successfully subpoenaed Rachel's complete cell phone records, which revealed literally hundreds of calls and text messages going back and forth constantly to Brandon's phone number over those same 8 months. The timing matched up perfectly with the credit card charges. Rachel's lawyer tried desperately to argue that all this financial evidence wasn't relevant to determining whether I posed any physical threat to Rachel's safety. The judge immediately shut that argument down hard, said it was absolutely relevant because it clearly demonstrated that Rachel had been deliberately planning and actively carrying out an extensive affair for many months, which provided crucial context for understanding my reaction. The restraining order was dismissed completely. Rachel immediately filed for divorce the very next day. She's asking for permanent monthly spousal support payments, half the total value of the house even though it's clearly my sole inheritance, and half of absolutely everything else we own. Her divorce lawyer is still trying to use the pending assault charge against me, claiming I'm mentally unfit to handle major financial decisions. My criminal defense lawyer says that charge will almost certainly be reduced down to simple disorderly conduct with probation. But the hardest part is dealing with Tyler. Right after his testimony ended, I confronted him outside the courthouse in the parking lot, asked him directly why he would deliberately lie under oath just to help his cheating mother. He looked me straight in the eyes and told me he wasn't lying, that this was genuinely how he experienced our family dynamics. I told him that having reasonable rules and clear expectations for your child isn't abuse, and that every single decision I made was for the good of our family. He replied that's exactly the kind of thing an abusive person would say, and that he's genuinely proud of his mother for finally finding the courage to stand up to me. Haven't spoken a single word to him since. He's currently living with Rachel at her sister Hannah's house, and they've both blocked my phone number. My brother Kevin keeps telling me I should try harder to repair the relationship, but I honestly don't know how you're supposed to get over your own son falsely accusing you of abuse in court. The divorce proceedings are going to be an absolute mess. I'm back living in my house, but it doesn't feel anything like home anymore. Third update: divorce settlement and scorched earth. The divorce was officially finalized last week, and I got a significantly better result than anyone expected. The judge clearly saw through Rachel's lies about abuse and control, and all that detailed financial evidence of her affair made a massive difference. Rachel got almost nothing compared to what she was demanding. The judge ruled definitively that the house remains mine alone as inherited property that was never part of our marital assets. Rachel tried arguing she was entitled to significant compensation for improvements made over our marriage, but my lawyer Tom proved conclusively that most major renovations, including the kitchen remodel, finished basement, and new roof, were all paid for entirely with my personal income, not joint marital funds. She was awarded exactly $12,000 total for her contributions to improvements. That's it. For all other marital assets, the judge divided everything according to who contributed what, and also factored in conduct during the marriage. Rachel kept her car that's in her name, all her personal belongings, and $25,000 from our joint savings. I kept my car, all my retirement accounts that I'd been contributing to for 20 years, and everything else, including furniture and household items. Absolutely zero spousal support awarded due to her proven adultery and her ability to work. She has a bachelor's degree in business and actual work experience, so the judge stated she's perfectly capable of supporting herself. The best moment was when Rachel's lawyer tried arguing she desperately needed more money because she was starting over after years of financial dependence. The judge actually laughed out loud and said someone who had freely spent $15,000 on luxury hotels and expensive gifts for her lover clearly knew exactly how to handle money just fine. Rachel absolutely lost it when the ruling came down, started crying hysterically and saying it wasn't fair, that she'd given up her entire career for our family. Complete lie. She worked part-time by her own choice and quit voluntarily 3 years ago because she claimed she was tired of office politics, not because I forced her. The judge told her very firmly that adultery has real legal consequences and that deliberately using marital funds to support an affair is a serious breach of fiduciary duty. She said Rachel could appeal if she wanted, but the evidence was crystal clear, and the ruling was completely within state guidelines for at-fault divorces. Tyler was in the courtroom for the final hearing, still supporting his mother. When the judge announced the ruling, Tyler actually stood up and shouted that this was nonsense, and his mother had nowhere to go now. The bailiff had to tell him to sit down and be quiet, or he'd be removed. After the hearing ended, Tyler followed me out to the parking lot and started yelling, told me I was destroying his mother's entire life and being heartless for leaving her with nothing. I calmly replied that his mother destroyed her own life by choosing to cheat on me for 8 months. Tyler said a real man would take care of his ex-wife financially, no matter what she'd done wrong. That's when I completely lost my patience. Told him straight up that a real son doesn't lie under oath in court to help his unfaithful mother, and if he wants to keep living in his delusional fantasy world where she's the victim, he can support her himself. He said he'd help her as much as he could, but he's just a broke college student. I replied he'd have even less money now because I was immediately cutting off all his tuition payments and living expenses. If he wanted to actively choose his mother's side over mine, he could also take full responsibility for handling his own education costs. Tyler looked absolutely shocked, like it never occurred to him his decisions could have real consequences. Said he couldn't afford to stay in college without my financial help. I told him he should have thought about that before he testified against me. Rachel overheard our conversation and came running over yelling that I couldn't punish Tyler for telling his truth. I replied very clearly that Tyler deliberately lied under oath, and now he has to live with the natural consequences, exactly the same way she has to live with the consequences of her affair. The current situation is Rachel's living with her sister Hannah, but her brother-in-law is already getting tired of having her there. Rachel's applied for several apartments, but her credit score isn't good, and she has no recent employment history. Most apartment complexes want first month, last month, and security deposit all up front, and she can't afford that even with the $25,000 from the settlement. Tyler went back to college but called me last week begging for me to reconsider cutting off his support. Said he'd applied for student loans, but they don't cover all his tuition and expenses, and he's probably going to have to drop out. Told him he could get a part-time job like thousands of other college students, or he could find some way to genuinely rebuild our relationship. He asked what he'd have to do. I said he'd need to publicly admit that he lied in court and apologize publicly for defaming my character. He insisted he didn't lie, that he just shared his honest perspective. I replied that his supposed perspective almost cost me my house and my financial security, and I wasn't interested in his reinterpretation of history. I've been living completely alone in my house for a few months now, and honestly, it's surprisingly peaceful. No constant drama, no walking on eggshells, no wondering what Rachel's doing. I eat exactly what I want. Watch whatever I feel like watching, don't have to answer to anyone. My brother Kevin thinks I'm being too hard on Tyler, keeps saying he's just a confused kid caught in a terrible situation. But I don't see it that way. Tyler made an active, conscious choice to participate in trying to destroy me financially and legally. Being young doesn't justify lying under oath. Rachel's been trying to contact me through mutual friends, asking for financial help with housing. Some people have suggested I should give her money for an apartment deposit for Tyler's sake, but I don't owe Rachel anything anymore, and Tyler already chose his side. I worked my absolute tail off for 18 solid years to build a stable life for my family, and they both threw everything I did right in my face as soon as it became convenient for them. Now it's their turn to build their own lives without any help from me. Final update, Karma is absolutely beautiful. It's been 2 full years since the divorce was finalized, and I honestly never thought I'd be updating this story again, But apparently karma isn't quite done with my former family yet. What happened next is honestly so perfect, I almost can't believe it's real. Tyler married his college girlfriend Olivia last September, in what I heard was a pretty nice ceremony. Obviously, I wasn't invited since we still haven't spoken since the divorce proceedings. I only found out from my brother Kevin, who heard about it from another family member. Rachel apparently paid for the entire wedding with borrowed money she doesn't have, desperately trying to maintain appearances. Olivia seemed like a genuinely good girl the one time I met her before everything went sideways. Smart young woman, was studying accounting, came from a solid family with good values. I always thought Tyler was extremely lucky to have found someone like her, but apparently he didn't value what he had. 3 weeks ago, Olivia discovered that Tyler was actively cheating on her. And here's the absolutely perfect kicker that makes this whole thing beautiful in a cosmic justice kind of way. He was having an affair with a married woman he met directly through his mother, Rachel. Rachel had finally managed to get herself a job as a receptionist at a real estate office downtown after months of searching, and Tyler started stopping by occasionally to visit her there. That's where he met this woman named Michelle, around 35 years old, married with 2 young kids at home. The affair eventually came to light because Michelle's husband found incriminating text messages on her phone late one night. He confronted her about it, she broke down, and confessed everything. And then Michelle's husband contacted Olivia directly through social media to tell her exactly what was happening. Turns out Tyler had been spending money they absolutely didn't have on hotels and expensive dinners with this woman. Exact same pattern as his mother's affair with Brandon. Like mother, like son. Olivia kicked him out of their apartment immediately that same night, filed for divorce within 1 week, and moved back in with her parents who welcomed her home. She emptied their entire joint bank account before he could touch it, and literally threw his wedding ring in his face in the parking lot of their apartment complex in front of neighbors. Here's where this story gets personally interesting for me. Tyler called me 2 weeks ago, literally crying on the phone, begging and pleading for me to help him out financially. Said Olivia took absolutely everything and he can't pay his rent or car payments anymore. Said he made a terrible mistake, and now he finally understands what I went through with Rachel. Asked if I could possibly help him pay for a divorce lawyer and maybe cover his rent for a few months. I asked him very directly if he was calling to apologize for lying about me in court. He said the situation was different because he was just trying to protect his mother at the time. Told him to call me back when he's genuinely ready to admit he lied and apologize sincerely. Then I hung up the phone. Rachel called me the very next day, which was interesting timing. Apparently, she's also having serious financial problems currently. The receptionist job doesn't pay much at all, and she doesn't have any client base or commission structure yet to supplement it. Her sister's husband finally got fed up and kicked her out of their house after nearly 2 years. So she's been living in a weekly rate motel that costs $300 every week and eating through her settlement money fast. She actually asked if I would consider lending her money for first month's rent and security deposit on a real apartment. I asked her why on earth I would ever do that. She said for the sake of our family and because Tyler desperately needs stability while he's going through his own difficult divorce. The irony was almost too much. I actually laughed out loud at that response. Told her Tyler made his decision when he chose to testify against me in court, and she made her decision when she decided to sleep with Brandon in my shower. Rachel started crying and saying she knew she'd made terrible mistakes, but I was being unnecessarily cruel. Said the affair was a mistake she deeply regretted and she never wanted things to escalate this far. Still playing the victim after all this time. I told her that spending $7,000 on another man over 8 months wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate conscious decision she made every single day for months. Then she said something that genuinely made me angry all over again. She said if I helped them financially now, it would prove I was the bigger person and had truly forgiven them for everything. As if real forgiveness somehow meant financing their lives after they actively tried to destroy mine in court. Told her very clearly that forgiveness doesn't mean paying for their bad decisions and terrible choices, and I'm not interested whatsoever in being the bigger person here. Said I genuinely hope both she and Tyler learn to live with the consequences of their own choices, exactly the same way I had to learn to live with mine. Tyler's called 3 more times since that initial conversation. Each call sounds progressively more desperate. Apparently, he's now 2 months behind on rent, and his car is literally about to be repossessed by the bank. He had to drop out of college completely because he couldn't afford tuition without my help, and now he's working at a chain pizza place making $12 an hour delivering pizzas. The last time Tyler called, he finally said he was sorry for testifying against me in court, but then immediately added that he only did it because he genuinely believed his mother and honestly thought he was doing the right thing at the time. Still making excuses. Told him that wasn't a real apology for lying. It was just another excuse for lying. There's a massive difference between those two things. Olivia actually reached out and contacted me a few weeks ago through social media messaging. She said she wanted to sincerely apologize for not seeing through Tyler and Rachel's lies during all the divorce proceedings. Said going through her own painful divorce made her truly understand what I must have felt being betrayed by people I trusted completely. We've actually been talking occasionally. She's a good person who got caught up in a bad situation. I told her none of it was her fault, and she shouldn't feel guilty for believing her husband. Guys, we are so close to hit 100,000 subscribers on this channel. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. It really helps hit that 100,000 mark. Thanks for making this dream come true. My wife cheated on me and ended up in the hospital. Her family called me heartless for wanting a divorce. Then my daughter told me something that ended any mercy I had left. I destroyed her and her side piece. Sup, Reddit. A year ago, I had a wife, a house, and a clean record. Now I've just got the house. Could be worse. Name's Jared, 38 male. Life at this age was running on autopilot. Wake up at 6, make breakfast for the kids, argue with my daughter about screen time, convince my son that yes, he really did need to brush his teeth, drive them to school, fight traffic to the plant, work for 10 hours, fight traffic home, make dinner, help with homework, collapse on the couch, repeat until death. The American dream, baby. I worked as a quality control supervisor at a manufacturing plant that made industrial valves. Riveting stuff, I know. But it paid well, came with decent benefits, and gave me enough stability to raise 2 kids and keep a roof over our heads. My wife Rebecca was 36, worked as a regional sales coordinator for a medical supply company. Lots of travel, lots of client dinners, lots of late nights at the office. I never questioned it because that's what happens when you trust someone for 15 years. You stop looking for the lies because you assume they stopped telling them. We had 2 kids. Chloe was 14. Smart kid. Too smart for her own good sometimes. She had her mother's looks and my stubbornness, which was going to make her teenage years interesting for everyone. Ian was 10. Still believed in Santa until some kid at school ruined it last December. He cried for 2 hours. I wanted to find that kid's parents and have a conversation about raising little sociopaths. Ian was the easy one, though. Give him a video game and a snack, and he'd be content for hours. The marriage wasn't perfect. Nothing is after 15 years. We argued about money, about whose turn it was to handle the parent-teacher conferences, about why she was always on her phone during dinner. She complained that I didn't communicate enough. I complained that she communicated too much with everyone except me. Normal stuff. That Tuesday morning, Rebecca told me she had a 3-day sales conference in Indianapolis. She'd done similar trips before, usually coming back with stories about boring presentations and overpriced hotel food. She packed her suitcase the night before, laid out her work clothes, set her alarm for some ungodly hour so she could beat traffic. I kissed her goodbye at the door, while the kids ate cereal in the kitchen. She smelled like that perfume I'd bought her for Christmas. Should have wondered why she was wearing it for a boring sales conference. But I didn't, because I'm a trusting idiot. I dropped the kids at school, then sat in traffic for 45 minutes listening to sports radio. Work was work. A quality issue on the production line had everyone panicking. Some gaskets were coming out of spec, which doesn't sound like a big deal until you realize those gaskets were going into valves that controlled natural gas flow. One failure could mean an explosion. So yeah, kind of a big deal. I spent 10 hours babysitting the production crew, checking measurements, rejecting about 2,000 units that would have to be scrapped, and filling out enough paperwork to kill a small forest. By the time I got home, it was almost 7, and I was running on fumes. Made spaghetti for dinner, because it was the one thing both kids would eat without complaining. We watched some superhero movie Ian picked. I sent them to bed, and settled into the couch with the kind of exhausted satisfaction that comes from surviving another day. Then my phone rang. Rebecca's mother, Janet. The woman could talk for 3 hours about nothing. Once called me to complain about the weather for 20 minutes while I was trying to handle a vendor crisis at work. So I almost let it go to voicemail. But something made me pick up. The voice on the other end wasn't the usual chatty tone. It was shaking. You gotta get to the hospital. Now. Janet, slow down. What's going on? It's Rebecca. Something happened. I don't know. Just get here. Please. Then she just started sobbing in a way that made my stomach drop. I was already grabbing my keys, my brain running through every bad scenario at once. Car accident on the highway. Heart attack, though she was too young for that. Stroke. Some random attack in a hotel parking lot. Maybe a robbery gone wrong. Maybe a reckless driver. I couldn't keep up with my own thoughts. I called my brother Mike and told him to come watch the kids, that there was an emergency and I didn't have time to explain. He lived 20 minutes away but said he'd break every speed limit. That's Mike. Doesn't ask questions when it matters. The drive to the hospital was a blur of yellow lights and white knuckles. I ran at least 3 red lights that I remember, probably more that I don't. The parking lot was a maze of one-way lanes and confusing signs. I ended up leaving my car in a spot that definitely wasn't a real parking space and jogging toward the emergency entrance. Found Janet in the waiting room. Red eyes, tissue wadded up in her hands. She couldn't tell me what happened. Just kept saying Rebecca was inside, that the doctors wouldn't tell her much because she wasn't listed as primary contact, that the police had been there and asked questions she couldn't answer. Police. That word stuck in my head like a splinter I couldn't reach. The doctor who finally came to talk to me had the kind of face that had delivered bad news too many times to show much emotion anymore. She led me to a small office. She told me Rebecca had been attacked. Someone had smashed a bottle across her head and face. Multiple lacerations, some deep enough to require extensive stitching. Damage to her left eye that was still being assessed. Possible permanent scarring. Broken cheekbone on the left side. She was stable but sedated, and they were monitoring for brain swelling. Attacked? I heard myself say. She's supposed to be in Indianapolis. At a conference. The doctor paused. Her expression shifted. Mr. Ashford, your wife wasn't brought in from Indianapolis. I sat there trying to process the words. My wife was supposed to be at a sales conference 3 hours away. What kind of conference involves getting your face ripped open with broken glass? Then the doctor's voice dropped lower. She mentioned that when Rebecca was brought in, there were signs of recent sexual activity. Given the circumstances of how she was found, the location where it happened, the presence of a male suspect who fled the scene, the police had questions. I didn't understand at first. Or maybe I just didn't want to understand. The doctor was careful with her words, but the implication was clear enough. Whatever happened to Rebecca, it wasn't a random attack in some Indianapolis hotel. There was more to the story. I thanked her without knowing what I was thanking her for. She told me Rebecca was resting, that I could see her in a few hours when the sedation wore off, that the police would want to talk to her again in the morning. I walked out of that office feeling like the ground wasn't solid anymore. Janet was still crying in the waiting room. I sat down next to her and stared at the wall, my mind trying to catch up with what my gut already knew. The next 48 hours were brutal. I bounced between the hospital and home, trying to keep the kids' lives as normal as possible while mine was falling apart around me. Mike stayed at the house, handling school runs and meals, not asking questions, but clearly knowing something was very wrong. I told the kids that Mom had been in an accident, that she was hurt but would be okay, that they'd see her soon. Chloe looked at me and asked what kind of accident. I told her we'd talk about it later. Rebecca was awake by the second day, but heavily medicated. Her face was wrapped in white bandages like a mummy, only her right eye visible through the gauze. The left side of her face had taken the worst of it. The doctors said she'd need at least 3 reconstructive surgeries over the next few years, maybe more. The damage wasn't just cosmetic. It was structural. They were still running tests. I visited her room a few times, kept the conversation short and surface level. How are you feeling? Do you need anything? The doctors say the swelling is going down. That's good. I'll bring you some magazines. She tried to talk about the attack once. Started saying something about a misunderstanding, about things getting out of control, about how it wasn't what it looked like. I held up my hand and told her to rest. Not because I cared about her rest, because I wasn't ready to hear whatever lie she'd rehearsed in her medicated haze. The thing is, I'm not stupid. The inconsistencies were stacking up, and I couldn't ignore them anymore. She was supposed to be in Indianapolis. She was supposed to be at a conference, but there were no coworkers calling to check on her, no colleagues sending flowers, no boss reaching out with concern. And the way she looked at me with that one visible eye, it was the look of someone who'd been caught. Her family showed up in waves over those 2 days. Her mother practically moved into the waiting room, demanding updates from nurses who didn't have any. Her sister drove in from Ohio, looking worried but also strangely uncomfortable around me. Her brother flew in from Arizona, stood around being useless, and made comments about how we needed to stay strong as a family. None of them would look me in the eye. That's what I noticed. Every single one of them avoided direct eye contact with me, like they knew something I didn't and felt guilty about it. On the 3rd morning, 2 detectives showed up asking to speak with Rebecca. I spotted them at the nurses' station, showing badges and speaking in low voices. One was a woman in her 40s. The other was a younger guy who mostly took notes. I watched them walk into her room from my spot in the hallway. The door closed. I stood there for almost an hour, watching nurses come and go, orderlies pushing carts, the whole routine of hospital life happening around me while I waited to find out if my marriage was what I thought it was. When they came out, they asked if we could talk privately. We went to a small conference room. The female detective closed the door and didn't waste time on small talk. Mr. Ashford, I'm going to be straight with you. Your wife wasn't attacked in Indianapolis. She was at a motel, 20 minutes from your house, place called the Pine View Motor Lodge. The words hit me square in the chest. She kept talking, but I was already doing the math. My wife had been meeting a man there. Surveillance footage from the parking lot showed them arriving together in his truck, holding hands, laughing, kissing in full view of anyone who might be watching. The detective paused to let that sink in, studying my face for a reaction. They'd been in the room for about 2 hours when something went wrong. An argument, shouting loud enough that the front desk clerk called the room to complain. Then a crash. Then silence. When nobody answered the follow-up call, the clerk went to check and found Rebecca on the floor in a pool of blood, face destroyed, broken bottle on the carpet, the man gone. I sat there trying to make sense of what she was telling me. The man's name was Garrett Keene, district manager at Rebecca's company, married with 3 kids. They'd been having an affair for at least 8 months based on credit card records and witness statements from coworkers who'd noticed things but hadn't wanted to get involved. 8 months. Every fake business trip. Every late night at the office. Every time she said she was too tired when she got home, because she'd already been somewhere else, with someone else. The detective asked if I had any questions. I had about 1,000, but couldn't form any of them into words. She gave me her card and told me they were looking for Garrett, that he'd fled the scene and hadn't been located yet. I walked out of that hospital without saying goodbye to anyone. Just kept walking until I found a bench near the parking garage and sat there watching everything around me. My wife had cheated on me for 8 months, while I was working 50-hour weeks and making spaghetti for our kids and thinking we were solid. I should have been devastated. Probably was, somewhere underneath. But the main thing I felt was cold, like something inside me had shut off and wasn't coming back on any time soon. I sat there until the sun started going down, and Mike called asking where I was, and if the kids should eat without me. I told him I'd be home soon. The next week was all about keeping it together while I figured out my next move. I played the role of concerned husband because I needed time. Time to gather evidence, time to prepare, time to figure out exactly how I was going to handle whatever came next. Rebecca came home 5 days after the attack. Her face was still wrapped in bandages, the left side hidden completely. The doctor said there would be permanent scarring, that she'd need multiple surgeries, that the damage was significant enough that she should prepare herself psychologically. Whatever beauty she'd had was gone, shattered by the same bottle her boyfriend had used when she tried to end things. I helped her get settled in the guest bedroom. That was my first move. Not our bedroom. The guest bedroom on the opposite side of the house from the kids. She noticed but didn't say anything. Probably thought I was being considerate of her recovery needs. Let her think that. Her family was everywhere. Janet moved into our house like she owned the place, rearranging my kitchen according to some system only she understood. Made suggestions about meal planning that implied I'd been feeding the kids garbage for years. Every morning she'd have some new complaint about how the house was run. Her sister slept on the couch and watched me like a hawk. Every time I came out of my study late at night, she'd be there pretending to read a magazine, asking if everything was okay. Her brother tried to have man-to-man talks with me about marriage and forgiveness. The guy had been divorced twice. His second wife got a restraining order. But sure, let's take relationship advice from him. He cornered me in the garage one evening while I was pretending to look for a tool. Look, I know this is rough, but Rebecca needs you right now. She almost died, man. I kept my back to him, staring at the pegboard. She almost died in a motel room with another dude. People mess up. Marriages get through worse than this. I turned around and looked him dead in the eyes. Yours didn't. He opened his mouth, closed it, then walked back inside without another word. Didn't try to lecture me again after that. I smiled through the rest of it, nodded at the right moments, said the right things about healing and support and taking it one day at a time, played the role so well that even I almost believed it sometimes. But every night after everyone was asleep, after the house went quiet, I was in my study building a case that would burn everything down. I went through Rebecca's laptop while she was knocked out on pain meds, found the secondary email account she'd been using to communicate with Garrett. The password was saved in her browser. 8 months of messages. Every single one made me want to puke. Pet names that made my skin crawl. Inside jokes. Plans for their next meetup at the motel. Photos I had to close immediately. Videos I didn't even open. She'd been living a whole parallel existence where she was apparently happy and fulfilled and completely unburdened by guilt. The credit card statements told their own story. A lingerie store I'd never heard of. A jewelry boutique that definitely wasn't for anything she'd worn around me. Weekend getaways disguised as work retreats. Dinners at restaurants we couldn't afford because I was saving for the kids' college funds. All of it funneled through our joint account while I worked overtime to build our savings like the world's most oblivious fool. My buddy Bruce worked in insurance fraud investigation, the kind of job where you spend your days tracking down liars and documenting their deception. I called him and explained the situation without going into too much detail. He didn't ask questions, just told me to send him what I had and give him a few days. He came back with more than I expected. Phone records showing calls and texts to Garrett at all hours. Late-night conversations that sometimes lasted 2 or 3 hours while I was sleeping down the hall. GPS data from the family phone plan showing exactly where Rebecca had been every time she claimed to be somewhere else. She'd developed a whole routine around betraying me. I printed everything, organized it into a folder, put it in a locked drawer in my study where nobody would find it. The kids knew something was wrong. Chloe asked me once why I was sleeping in my study instead of with Mom. I told her Mom needed rest and I didn't want to disturb her. She looked at me with those eyes that saw too much and nodded like she didn't believe me but wasn't going to push. Ian was easier to manage. He just wanted things to be normal. So I made things feel normal for him. Same routines, same bedtimes, same snacks after school. 2 weeks after Rebecca came home, her family finally left. Janet made a big production of it, hugging everyone and promising to call every day and giving me a pointed look that suggested I'd better step up now that she wasn't there to supervise. I smiled and said I'd take good care of her daughter. The house was quiet after they left. Rebecca was still in the guest room, still bandaged, still trying to catch my eye and start conversations I wasn't interested in having. She tried apologies that I cut off, tried explanations that I walked away from. She was getting frustrated, I could tell. Good. But something was holding me back from confronting her. A gut feeling that there was more to find out. Turns out, I was right. It happened on a Thursday night, 3 weeks after Rebecca came home. The kids were supposed to be in bed. Rebecca was in the guest room. I was in my study going through the evidence folder again, looking for anything I might have missed. There was a soft knock on the door. Hesitant. Chloe was standing there in her pajamas. Her eyes were red and puffy, like she'd been crying for a while. Something about the way she was standing there made my stomach drop. She asked if she could talk to me about something important. Something she should have told me a long time ago. I pulled up a chair next to mine and she sat down without meeting my eyes. For a long time, neither of us said anything. Then she started talking. She told me that Garrett had come to our house. Last April, while I was on a work trip to the Cleveland plant. Rebecca had told the kids he was a colleague who needed to pick up some important documents. He'd stayed for a few hours. Longer than necessary, but Chloe hadn't thought much about it at the time. She'd been doing homework in her room when he came in without knocking. Said he was looking for the bathroom. But he didn't leave. I'm not going to repeat what she told me next. I can't. But I'll say this. It took every ounce of self-control I had not to put my fist through the wall while my daughter described what that man did to her while her mother was downstairs knowing he was in our house. When she finished, her voice had gone flat and empty. I asked her gently if she'd told anyone about it before. She nodded, started crying. She'd told her mother. The very next day, as soon as she could get Rebecca alone. What did she say? My voice came out rough, barely controlled. She said I was confused, that Garrett would never do something like that. She said if I told anyone, it would mess everything up. She said that to you. She made me promise not to tell you, Dad. She said it would blow up our whole family. Her voice cracked. I sat there for a long moment, boiling. My wife hadn't just cheated on me. She'd covered up what that man did to our daughter, chosen her affair over our child, let him keep coming to our house, kept meeting him at that motel, while our daughter carried that weight alone for months. I hugged Chloe for a long time, told her none of this was her fault, told her she was the bravest kid I knew for finally telling me, told her I was going to fix it, that Garrett was going to pay for what he did. Then I walked her back to her room, made sure she was okay, and told her to try to get some sleep. I spent the rest of the night staring at the wall, planning exactly how I was going to destroy everyone responsible. The war was about to start. The next morning, I called my lawyer before the sun was fully up, told him everything, the affair, the attack, and what Garrett had done to Chloe. The line went silent for a long moment. Then he started talking about next steps, criminal charges, protective orders, a divorce strategy that would leave Rebecca with nothing. Then I called the detective who'd given me her card at the hospital, Told her there was new information about Garrett Keene, information that changed everything about how they should be looking for him. She listened without interrupting, asked questions. When I finished, she said they'd escalate the search, add charges to the warrant. Based on what Chloe had told me, charges that would ensure Garrett Keene never walked free again. I spent the next 2 weeks running on pure, focused anger. By day, I went through the motions of normal life, dropped the kids at school, went to work, handled problems on the production line, came home, made dinner, helped with homework. By night, I added to the evidence folder, documented everything, prepared for the war I was about to wage. Rebecca tried to talk to me several times, started with tearful apologies that I shut down with one look, moved on to explanations about how Garrett had manipulated her, pressured her, made her feel things she couldn't control. I listened to all of it with a blank face, letting her dig her own grave with every word. She never mentioned Chloe, never acknowledged what she'd covered up. Either she didn't know Chloe had told me, or she was gambling that she could keep that secret buried forever. Either way, it just added fuel to the fire I was building. 2.5 weeks after I learned the full truth, the police called. They'd found Garrett. He'd been hiding at his brother's hunting cabin 4 hours north, probably thinking he could wait out the heat and slip away somewhere nobody knew his name. They arrested him on a Thursday morning. I found out that afternoon. I should have let the system handle it. Should have trusted the courts, the lawyers, the whole machinery of justice to do what it was supposed to do. That would have been the smart play, the mature response. But when I thought about what he'd done to Chloe, what he'd done to my family, something took over that didn't care about being smart or mature. I told Mike I needed him to watch the kids for the night. Didn't tell him why. He looked at me for a long moment, reading something in my face, then just nodded. I drove to the county jail where Garrett was being held pending arraignment. His family had posted bail around 4:30 that afternoon. $100,000, which meant they'd put up property as collateral. But jail releases take forever. Paperwork, processing, inventory of personal items. I sat in the parking lot across from the release exit for over 3 hours, watching the doors, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. Important detail here. The bail was set before the detective called me back about the upgraded charges related to Chloe. The original warrant was just for the assault on Rebecca. The other charges hadn't been filed yet. So technically, Garrett was walking out on bail for beating my wife with a bottle. The stuff about my daughter was still working its way through the system. It was almost 8 when the release door finally opened. Garrett stepped out into the vestibule area, that little covered section between the building and the parking lot where they let you collect yourself before facing the world. There were cameras everywhere. I knew that. A deputy was holding the door. A couple other people were milling around, probably family members waiting for their own releases. He was carrying a clear plastic bag with his wallet and keys and whatever else they'd taken from him during booking. His eyes scanned the parking lot, probably looking for whoever was picking him up. Then he saw me. I was already walking toward him. Not running, just walking. The recognition hit his face, then confusion, then something that might have been fear. Hey, hold on. He held up one hand, the other clutching his property bag. Look, I get that you're mad, but just let me... You touched my daughter. His face went white. Whatever excuse he'd been cooking up died right there. I didn't give him a chance to find another one. The first punch caught him square in the nose. I felt cartilage crunch, saw blood spray. He stumbled backward, hands coming up too late. The second punch split his lip against his teeth. He was already falling when I hit him a third time, this one glancing off his cheekbone as he went down. He hit the concrete hard. The back of his head bounced off the curb. That's where most of the real damage came from, that impact with the concrete. His face had already taken 3 solid punches, but when his cheek hit that curb, I heard something crack. I got one more punch in, maybe 2, before hands grabbed me from behind. The deputy who'd been holding the door, big guy, moved fast. He had me on the ground with my arm twisted behind my back before I could process what was happening. The whole thing lasted maybe 15 seconds. They cuffed me right there in the vestibule, cameras recording everything, witnesses gaping, Garrett groaning on the ground with blood pooling under his face. My right hand was throbbing, knuckles split, wrist already starting to swell. Didn't care. I spent the night in holding. Same jail where Garrett had just been released from. They processed me, took my statement, gave me a phone call. I called Mike, told him what happened. He said he'd be there first thing in the morning. The charges came down the next day. Assault in the 2nd degree. Could have been worse. Could have been aggravated assault if the prosecutor wanted to push it. Garrett's injuries were significant, but not life-threatening. Broken nose, split lip, 2 teeth knocked loose, orbital fracture on the left side from where his face met the curb. The prosecutor looked at my case and looked at Garrett's case and saw the whole picture. Clean record for me. 38 years without so much as a speeding ticket. Full cooperation with the arrest. No flight risk. And on the other side, a man who'd assaulted my wife and done worse to my daughter. My lawyer worked out a plea. Assault in the 3rd degree, reduced from 2nd. 18 months probation. 80 hours of community service. Court ordered anger management. 12 sessions. Restitution for Garrett's medical bills, which came to about $4,000. No jail time beyond the night I'd already served. The judge who accepted the plea looked at me over his glasses and said he understood why I'd done what I did. But he also said the law doesn't allow for vigilante justice, no matter how justified it might feel. Said I was lucky it wasn't worse. I accepted the deal and signed the paperwork. My hand still hurt from the punches. Worth every bit of pain. Because the real punishment for Garrett wasn't going to come from me hitting him in a jail vestibule. It was going to come from everything that happened next. The divorce proceedings began 3 weeks later. Garrett was out of the hospital by then, his face held together with plates and screws, looking at a long recovery and a longer list of criminal charges now that the investigation into Chloe's assault had caught up with the original warrant. Rebecca hired a lawyer who tried to paint me as an abusive husband, guy named Harlan with slicked back hair. He argued that my violent tendencies had created a toxic home environment, that Rebecca had been driven into another man's arms by my emotional unavailability, that my attack on Garrett proved I was dangerous and unstable. My lawyer destroyed him. We presented the evidence. 8 months of hotel receipts, itemized and dated. Credit card statements. GPS logs with timestamps proving every single lie she'd told. The whole thing. We showed that Rebecca had spent over $12,000 of marital funds on her affair. $12,000 that should have gone to our kids' education, our retirement, our future. But the thing that really sealed it was Chloe's statement, presented in a sealed proceeding to protect her identity, read by a court-appointed advocate since Chloe was too young to testify directly in family court. Every word of it devastating. Harlan tried to object. Your Honor, this is prejudicial and has nothing to do with dividing assets. Sit down, counselor. The judge didn't even look at him. I've heard enough. The judge looked at Rebecca like she was something he'd scraped off his shoe. When he delivered the ruling, his voice was flat and final. Full custody of both children, with Rebecca getting supervised visitation only if and when a court-appointed therapist determined the children were ready. The house was mine. My retirement accounts were protected. I got 80% of our savings. Rebecca got her personal belongings, her car, and exactly $5,000, which her lawyer had argued was necessary for her to establish independent housing. 15 years of marriage, and she walked away with barely enough to cover first and last month's rent. She tried to appeal. Harlan filed motions arguing the settlement was unconscionable, that the judge had shown bias, that Rebecca's injuries should have been taken into account as mitigating circumstances. Every motion was denied. Eventually, Harlan stopped returning her calls. Garrett's trial lasted 3 days. His defense attorney tried to argue that the assault on Chloe was a he-said-she-said situation, that there was no physical evidence, that my daughter might be confused or seeking attention. I had to leave the courtroom during that part because I was afraid of what I might do if I had to listen to more of it. The jury didn't buy any of it. 12 people looked at the evidence, listened to the testimony, and came back with a verdict in less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. 22 years. The judge's voice echoed through the courtroom. 12 for the assault, 10 consecutive for the abuse of a minor. You'll be eligible for parole in 15 years, Mr. Keene. I suggest you use that time to think about what you've done. Garrett's face went slack. His lawyer put a hand on his shoulder. His mother started crying somewhere in the gallery. His wife had already divorced him by then, filed the papers within a week of his arrest, took the kids and vanished to somewhere out of state, started over with a new name and a story that probably didn't include the part about her ex-husband being a monster. Can't say I blamed her. She was a victim too, in her own way. I was in the courtroom when they let him out in cuffs. He looked at me once through the glass partition as they took him away. I smiled at him, just a little, just enough to make sure he saw it. Rebecca's life fell apart fast after the divorce. Lost her job within 2 months. The surgeries for her face were only partially covered by insurance, and the bills stacked up. Her family helped at first, but money runs out. Patience runs out. By the time the leaves changed that fall, she was living with her mother, working part-time at a drugstore, barely getting by. Her face never fully healed. The scars pulled at her features, left her looking like someone who'd lost a fight with a windshield. The doctors said more surgery might help. She couldn't afford it. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I was starting to feel like myself again. Chloe was seeing a counselor she actually trusted. She smiled sometimes, real smiles, not the fake ones she'd been wearing for months. She even started talking about trying out for the school play. Baby steps, but steps forward. Ian had adjusted with the resilience only kids can manage. He knew mom had done something bad. He knew dad was taking care of things. For now, that was enough explanation. I'd settled into a routine that felt sustainable. Work, kids, gym, sleep. Weekends with Mike, grilling on the patio, watching games, doing the normal stuff that had somehow become precious. The house was different. New paint in most rooms. New furniture. New everything in the master bedroom. I'd wiped Rebecca's presents from the walls, the shelves, the entire space. I was on the back porch one Saturday evening, watching Ian throw a ball for the neighbor's dog while Chloe pretended to read. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. The text was from Rebecca. New number since I'd blocked her old one. 4 words. We need to talk. I should have ignored it. Should have deleted it and moved on with my evening. But something made me respond. Maybe wanting to finally close the book on this. Maybe just curiosity about how far she'd fallen. She showed up the next afternoon while the kids were at Mike's. I watched her car pull into the driveway, watched her sit there for a full minute working up courage. When she finally got out, I saw what the months had done to her. The surgeries had helped some, but not enough. Her left eye drooped, the eyelid not tracking right. A thick scar ran from her temple to her jaw, puckered and shiny. Another twisted the corner of her mouth into a permanent half grimace. She tried to cover it with makeup. It didn't work. She looked like exactly what she was. The outside finally matched the inside. I didn't invite her in, just stood in the doorway. She started with apologies. Said she'd had time to think. Said she understood now how wrong she'd been. Said she was working on herself, trying to become a better person. Said she wanted a relationship with the kids, even if we could never be anything again. I let her talk, let her get through whatever speech she'd rehearsed in her car. Then she got to Chloe. I know I let her down. I know I should have believed her. I was scared, and Garrett told me she was making it up, and I wanted to believe him because you loved him more than you loved her. That's not true. You picked him over your own daughter. That's all that matters. She started crying. That messed up face looked even worse when she cried, Please, I'll do anything. Just tell me what to do. I looked at her for a long moment, at the scars, at the drooping eye, at what was left of the woman I'd married. There's nothing you can do. You made your choice. Now you gotta live with it. I stepped back and started closing the door. Wait, her hand shot out. The kids! Can I at least... When they're ready. If they're ever ready, that's up to them now. She stood there for a long moment, her face wet with tears, looking at me for any crack in the wall, any sign of the husband who'd loved her once, any hope that things could be different. She didn't find anything. She walked back to her car slowly, shoulders hunched, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. I watched her drive away and felt nothing but relief. Then I went inside, made a sandwich, and called Mike to see how the kids were doing. The sun went down, the house got quiet, and somewhere out there, Rebecca was driving back to whatever life she'd managed to scrape together. That night, after the kids were home and in bed, I sat on the back porch with a cup of coffee. My wife cheated on me and ended up in the hospital. Everyone asked me to forgive her. My decision to leave her was irrevocable. Looking at where I am versus where she ended up, I know I made the right call. Some bridges don't get rebuilt. Some people don't get second chances. And some men don't forgive. I'm one of them. And I sleep just fine at night. Guys, we are so close to hit 100,000 subscribers on this channel. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. It really helps hit that 100,000 mark. Thanks for making this dream come true.